You're using Pipedrive to manage a complex B2B sales process. Probably you have your setup not perfectly right already. In selling to international complex organizations, it is important to really understand all the stakeholders that are involved and how they shape the buying and decision-making process. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to understand the roles that everyone on the buying committee has, to map out the authority and influence they have over the decision that needs to be taken in your favor, to understand the sentiment, and finally help you understand what the things are that you need to drive in order to win the deal. Welcome to the Vizrim tutorial. Okay, let's dive into this. So, custom fields that we want to set up all circle around the person record. I have a tutorial about how to create custom fields in Pipedrive, so I'm not gonna jump into depth into that, but really stick with the content. There are some basic fields that you should have, which is the job title, which nowadays comes out of the box with Pipedrive, hasn't always been the case, and the department that you're talking to. Those two are basic fields. You should always have those for any kind of account. Once it comes to complex relationship and buying center management, the most important role that we have is the buying role. Buying roles can have very different shades, and actually you can customize them pretty much to your customers' decision makings. But there are at least 5 very famous sales literature books that I've analyzed in an article, which I'll link here in the comments, that define certain roles as a standard. I think the most commonly used ones are the economic buyer, the technical buyer, the approver, and the user buyer. The economic buyer typically is the person that has the biggest impact of your solution. It's not necessarily the CEO of the company, which is like the most random mistake to do on this persona, but it's really the person who most benefits commercially or economically from your solution. And that can be further down in the hierarchy. Technical buyers are very often brought in to assess a certain aspect of your solution. There can be a compliance aspect, there can be a real technical aspect, it can be other functions. They are subject matter experts. Usually they focus on a niche. Approvers are typically buying personas or buying roles that are involved in the process, but are not impacted by your solution. So that could be a lawyer reviewing your contract, that could be a procurement person reviewing the commercial terms, etc. There are more to those, and again, you can create them yourselves. You may be asking yourself, why doesn't he have the champion on there? After all, if you go through the MEDIC framework, the E is economic buyer, the first C is the champion. For me, the champion is more a sentiment aspect, and we'll get to that in the next chapter. Now let me show you how I've set this up in Pipedrive. So I'm here on a nice demo contact, and you'll see the buying rule is a custom attribute, and this is a single value attribute. So in the drop-down, I'll only have one value. I'm using emojis to make it more graphic, easier to use. Think about your sales reps. If you ask them to fill out forms, make it as convenient as possible. So for me, this person, a finance director, classical approver role. As you see, I have additional things here like influencer, end user, on top of what we discussed on the slide. Influencers typically are people that have an influence on the decision, but again, they are probably not involved in the decision-making process, or they are not very impacted by your solution. The next aspect we want to have a look at are influence and authority. Influence is how much a person can influence a decision. Authority is how much they actually can make the decision. So typically influencers can be people that are outside of the decision-making committee, but they have an influence as they are a subsequent process buyer, or they are in an adjacent function to the function that you're speaking to. They don't necessarily need to have authority, but they can have authority. Your economic buyer usually has high influence and high authority on the decision. On the authority side, an approver user or an approver buyer can have a lot of authority, but very little influence. They won't drive which vendor is picked, but they will drive if the deal is happening or not. Usually, I do not use Pipedrive to map influence and authority. I only use Vizrim. As on the org chart, you were way more easily seeing the authority, and Vizrim's additional capability to map out informal relationships allows us very well to map the influence of who has over whom. Sentiment. Remember, medic, I said champion's not a buying persona. To me, champion is a value of sentiment. I use the sentiment as the most important indicator on where I want to go next and how I navigate the account. In my best practice setup, the sentiment is a multi-value checkbox. In my best practice setup, the sentiment is a single value checkbox, because usually people don't have multiple minds, personas in themselves, right? And the best value that you can get is champion. Note, I have a 4 value scheme, because if somebody is neutral, I don't want the field to be filled. So none, to me, empty blank means neutral. Thinking back of adoption, people only will fill the ones that are actually having a sentiment, or where they know about a sentiment, rather than having to fill everything. So that means champion, supporter, blogger, adversary. Again, I'm using emojis to bring in colors, make this more engaging for the user. I'll make this contact a supporter. The last custom field that I usually set up in my best practice configuration is impact. And this one really drives your assessment of your strategy. The question, what are we doing next? Who do we need to win? Is a crossover of sentiment and impact. For me, impact means this is the grade to which your proposed solution, your offer, your proposal is impacting this person. So if I'm let's say an approver user, a lawyer who needs to review your contract, your solution does not impact me at all. But if I am an economic buyer of your solution, I have a very high expectation of the impact of your solution. So that means you will have to work me in a different way as compared to the legal representative. The impact value, I usually go on a scale from 1 to 3, where again, none means there is no impact. So blank field, there is no impact, don't fill it. Slightly impacted is 1, impacted 2, very impacted 3. Finance director, in my case, no, not impacted by my solution, not impacted by Vizrim. So I'll keep it exactly this way. Approver, no impact, supporter sentiment, because probably I've already talked to them and they like the discount I gave them. Now, if you want to throw this on a Vizrim org chart, that is where the magic really happens. So here in the Vizrim app, because of our native Pipedrive integration, I now get the information about all the custom fields directly in the context of the organizational chart. Not only do I see the hierarchy, the authority based on the levels, but also the influence based on the influence lines. And then I can, in this case, see where the impact, thanks to my custom field impact, lies in this organization. So in slight green, slightly impacted down to very prominent green, very impacted, right? So it's very easy to get a quick overview over a large organization like this one. But thanks to Vizrim's view feature, I can quickly switch up the set of attributes that I want to visualize and also the colors. So on my sentiment view, I get a sentiment analysis over this entirely large organization, and I immediately see where the areas are where people are in favor of us and where we have opponents. And I can start strategize about my next moves to circumvent the opponents and kind of build out momentum with my champions. So to recap, we talked about buying roles, the different concepts of the various sales methodologies. We talked about sentiment, and we talked about even the concept of impact. If you want to bring this to life in your Pipedrive environment, you can find our how-to tutorial in a written description down below. Thank you for watching.